Hi everyone, and welcome to another Sunday Roast. We're here once again with two wonderful guests and my wonderful co-host as well. We'll start with Rob. Rob, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and also for people who don't know? Well, you've been on the show before, but let's hear a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Max. I'm Rob Groves. I've been running the Truth to Power channel. Must be getting on 2 years now. We talk about Brexit. We talk about Tory corruption. We talk about government misdemeanors. Videos every Saturday. So that's us, me.
Fantastic. Phil, for people who may be new to the channel.
Yeah, at Phil Morehouse, I have the channel of different bias. Focus on UK politics. Again, Brexit comes up a lot. Westminster politics comes up a lot as well.
Fantastic. My wonderful co-host, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex, also known as Political X. I run a YouTube channel. I'm a historian and author. And my wonderful co-host, Max.
Thank you, Al. My name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel, where I talk about British politics and Brexit in particular. Alex, what's our first topic today?
Sunak. How long has he got left? Is he going to make it within the next 18 months, as they're predicting, to an election, or is he going to do something controversial like put through legislation like net zero? What are your thoughts on Rishi Sunak lasting and his net zero policy? Is that going to split the Conservatives?
I think they know that if they change Sunak, it will just trigger a general election. I don't think they can have yet another prime minister and still keep a straight face and avoid an election. So I think he's there for the duration, Alex, I think. In terms of an early election, I mean, the polls, there's a couple of outliers I see where they're suggesting the Labour lead has halved over the last few days. But the general poll trackers still seem to have Labour, if anything, increasing the lead at the moment. I think he'd have to be nuts to even be thinking about a general election at the moment. So I think he'll be with us for a while. I actually think he's had a big victory with the small rebellion against his Windsor framework vote on Wednesday. 22, was it, Tory MPs voting against? And they're the whack jobs on the far right of the party, the Mark Francoises, the maniac Truss, the appalling Richard Drax, the slave-owning families, heir. It's just a horrible, horrible collection of individuals. And I think Sunak's authority has probably been burgeoned this week with that. And who knows, maybe I'll actually go after the ERG a little bit because they're not the force they were. So I think, if anything, Sunak's in the ascendancy now.
Did anyone see Jacob Rees-Mogg have a bit of a chinwag and rant about it on GB News? Yeah.
No, I'm not a regular viewer of GB News, no.
Max, I think I saw you nodding your head. Have you seen a little bit?
I saw a bit of it, yeah, where he's basically saying that all of this is about Brexit.
I think Boris Johnson today has won in the court of public opinion.
There are more people in this audience who voted for Boris Johnson, for the Conservative Party, than for any other single party here. So let's have a show of hands, shall we? Who believes Boris Johnson was telling the truth yesterday?
Wow.
Okay. Wow.
And it's this position of Boris, his success in leading Brexit, that has ultimately led to him being in front of the Privileges Committee today. It was never really about cake or curtains or indeed about Chris Pincher. It was fundamentally about Brexit and the reaction of the establishment to Boris as the figure of Brexit. If I am the Woolworths of Nigel Farage, Boris is the Fortnum Mason of Brexiteers.
This is the attempts to bring down Boris Johnson is nothing to do with Partygate, nothing to do with cake. It's about bringing down Boris Johnson by Remainers. The Remainers are still there. I don't know who they are. He never names any names, but they are, of course, lurking in the shadows, and they want to bring down Boris Johnson because he got Brexit done. So they're angry about that. What's interesting is there was a clip from Times Radio today where they interviewed people in some marginal seats, and they were most of them were happy with Rishi Sunak over Keir Starmer. Now the question, I think, the problem was the question. They were saying, who do you prefer, Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, and not who do you prefer, Labour or the Tories? Because a lot of them liked Sunak, but they didn't like Starmer. But I think the question was a bit flawed, because I always believe that the next election will be a referendum on Tory policies and the economy. And people are not happy with that, even in the marginal seats.
Sunak is more popular than his party, which is why Tory MPs really probably ought to trust him a little bit more than they are doing. Instead of trying to pull him towards their policies, he maybe should give them a bit more free rein. In reality, his policies are no different than they would be under Boris Johnson. There'll be some people who think, that Boris Johnson was all about the Northern Ireland Protocol bill and stuff like that. But he only supported that when it looked like he was going to be toppled. He almost left it as like a ticking time bomb for his successor to bring them down. So the actual policies, as far as I can tell, are no different than they would be under Boris Johnson. But people prefer Rishi Sunak because he doesn't bring the crazy all the time like Boris Johnson did. His cabinet notwithstanding, who were essentially the same cabinet with just a few, chairs moved around. But Sunak is an asset for the Conservative, which is grim because he's really bad at politics. And, he showed that this week, didn't he, with his interview with the woman. There's this woman who can't afford to buy a light bulb until her daughter gets paid next week. What's she supposed to do? And he just went off on this. And
Panorama heard from a lady called Nikki in Cornwall. She works as a carer. She's on £10.50 an hour. And her kitchen is in darkness this week. She can't afford a light bulb for the kitchen until her daughter gets paid next week. And she's working in social care. It's hard to believe that's the UK in 2023, isn't it? And you were the Chancellor. You've been Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Now you're Prime Minister. I mean, your fingerprints are all over this economy, aren't they?
Well, I'm really proud that one of the decisions we make.
When you hear that somebody can't afford a light bulb.
I'm proud when you talk about social care. I'm actually proud that one of the things we did after I became Prime Minister was make some difficult decisions elsewhere. For example, decided to tax the profits of the largest companies more, given the circumstances we're in.
But when you hear somebody can't afford a light bulb.
Well, if you just let me explain what we're trying to do to help, and we're using that money to help people in those circumstances. We're actually putting more money into social care.
Because the fundamental problem that Sunak has is the same thing that all Tories have, is they try and claim that people who are in poverty are either not working or really bad at budgeting. So when you bring it to them, this is a person who works hard and cannot afford to replace a light bulb. It's like they can't answer it. And Sunak can't even waffle his way through that like Boris Johnson would. So, and he is going to get caught out in the campaign. He's going to be very, very bad in debates and interviews. But at the same time, he is the least broken down of the tools the Tories have, because he has a relatively clean image. When he published his tax summary, there were no real dangers in that. No one expected there to be. Everyone expected them to be fine. Dan Needle, who's the tax lawyer who put Nadim Zahawi under a lot of scrutiny over the summer, and who Zahawi threatened, he said people have this idea that people like Nadim Zahawi are like, that's how they all are, trying to get out of paying their taxes. And he said, no. In actual fact, most of them will pay their taxes to the extent the law requires. Whether the law should require more is a different matter. Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't have expected anything dodgy from Sunak's taxes at all, because most wealthy people will pay them to the extent the law requires. So, Sunak is relatively clean. It's everyone around him who keeps bringing the scandals, even though there's a few that maybe should stick to Sunak.
So I'm gonna slightly counter that with the issue of the blind trust in the USA. So the idea behind that, for any of our listeners who are unaware of what a blind trust is, essentially it's a trust fund, which you could argue is almost a form of a company. And essentially they manage investments on the behalf of Sunak. But what we don't know are two things. We don't know if he's just said, someone else go and run it. Here's my money, you go off and run the trust. Or he's set up a strategic plan to go, here's the strategy, this is what I want you to invest in, this is the area we want you to go and invest in. And the conflict of interest there is whether or not, and he has connections with other hedge funds in regards to the Moderna vaccine and the Moderna company, which then means he's got a conflict of interest when certain things come up with relation to that vaccine or other medical issues that might turn up. And that's the issue I would have with the blind trust. But I totally agree with most of what everyone said in terms of it's just avoidance, isn't it? He's got his tax down to 22% and nurse pays 21%. He's paying 1% more, even though if you are earning in a full-time job, like a doctor, consultant, over 100,000, a doctor is paying a higher rate of tax than Sunak. Which, is that fair? Is the system right for doing that when we need all this money at the moment? And he's got it down to 22%?
No, well, this whole thing of, if you're... It's the separation of the mega rich and everyone else, where they pay 22% on capital gains tax, when people working pay up to, was it 44%?
I think it's about 47.
47%?
47.
Or 48, I don't remember, 40, somewhere in the 40s. So as you said, yeah, if you're a consultant or if you're a doctor, if you're earning above a certain threshold, you're going to be paying a lot more tax than people like Rishi Sunak. And of course, this was a summary of his tax returns. It's not all the tax returns. His wife is not included in this either, where she's the real breadwinner, I think, in that family.
Yeah, that's it. Akshata Murthy from the billionaire Murthy family that own Infosys and things, and that is the elephant in the room. This is his tax affairs. It's not his family's tax affairs. And I think what's far more interesting would be to take that household as a whole, really. I think that's where all the juicy bits are.
Well, Infosys, I believe that's his father-in-law's company.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll be supplying Russia.
Yes, they are still active in the Russian market, yeah.
Which means that his family aren't pulling in the right direction in terms of dealing with Putin. And he's the prime minister. We can't have had more dodgy prime ministers. Phil, what are your thoughts on all that?
But the thing is, none of this cuts through to the public. They don't care because they see other Tories actually fiddling the taxes illegally. They see bullying. They all the Partygate scandals. That's what cuts through to the public. Conflicts of interest are not really what people discuss. If they were, there'd have been discussions about, going back years. It's not even just the current crop of cabinet. Conflicts of interest have been a massive issue for a great many years. Cases of where senior ministers have been given a donation. I mean, Jeremy Hunt one time was given a donation of just about £20,000 or something. And the person who donated it, lo and behold, got a public contract worth millions. But it doesn't, the public don't really care about that. They don't seem to care about it. I suppose they might care about it if it was a Labour minister doing it, because all of a sudden the media would make them care about it. But, so it needs to be something that conflicts of interest are not something that's part of everyone's everyday life. So they don't think about it. So it's more things that on a personal level. So a corrupt or bullying boss is something that can happen to people. So if there's, Dominic Raab, Gavin Williamson type bullying, then that's a serious issue. Someone who's sexually assaulting junior female staff, again, that can be part of a normal workplace. So that cuts through to people. These are the things that cut through, things that are identifiable, but things like conflicts of interest, I mean, that's matters purely for people involved in government.
It seems like it, yeah. Guy Fawkes, the effigy for treason, we burn every year. Everyone knows who that is. And that conflict of interest can still come back over Russia because the connection, because you just pointed out really well all these donations. Jeremy Hunt, I think, took a donation of 75. It's alleged that he took a donation of 75k from one of Putin's.
Nigel Adams, Karen Bradley, Robert Buckland, Conor Burns, Alan Cairns, Simon Clarke, James Davies, Michael Ellis, Liam Fox, Mark Garnier, Robert Halfon, Simon Hart, Chris Heaton-Harris, Jeremy Hunt, Brandon Lewis, Jason McCartney, David Morris, Joy Morrissey, Cheryl Murray, Andrew Percy, Mark Pritchard, Tom Pursglove, Will Quince, Mary Robinson, Alok Sharma, Chris Skidmore, Ian Stewart, Rishi Sunak, Justin Tomlinson, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Martin Vickers, Robin Walker, Craig Whittaker, and John Whittingdale.
5k from one of Putin's mates. He's one of the highest donor receivers from one of Putin's mates. And most of the Conservative Party have received between 5k and 75k in their donations.
Boris Johnson was paid over £100,000 to play tennis with the wife of
yes, one of the oligarchs.
One of the ministers in Putin's government, former minister in Putin's government. His wife paid £100,000 to Boris Johnson to play tennis. Maybe she thought she was playing tennis with Boris Becker, but instead she got Boris Johnson. I hope she got a refund.
Quickest tennis match ever.
Boris Becker could do with the money more.
But it's interesting to see that, it's not getting through to the public, and yet there are things in the public conscious that are very much like traitors will be punished, and that is actually a huge part of our culture to be we've been burning that effigy for over hundreds of years, which is nuts. It shows the power of the press more than anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, go back to you, Phil. What are your thoughts on that and the powers of the press that influence the...
I was watching something today, a clip that I'd completely forgotten about, someone put up, of Boris Johnson a few years ago being interviewed by, was it Eddie May or someone? But it was supposed to be Andrew Marr, but he wasn't there that day, so there was a sub in, and this guy was tearing Boris Johnson to pieces. First of all, about his lies, why he got sacked from the Times for lying, and Boris Johnson go, and he even said, do we really need to talk about this? Yes, we do. And then he went on to the lies he told Michael Howard, the Conservative Party leader at the time, which got him sacked. Then he went on to agreeing to give the address of a journalist to someone who wanted to beat him up or have him beaten up, and he really hammered it.
Let me ask you about some of the things that came up in the documentary.
Right. Well, I haven't seen it, so
but this happened in your life, so you know about this. The Times let you go after you made up a quote. Why did you make up a quote?
Well, this again, these are big terms for what happened. Well, I can tell you the whole thing. I mean, I think are you sure our viewers wouldn't want to hear more about housing?
If you don't want to talk about the made-up quote, let me talk about something.
It was a long and lamentable story.
Okay, but you made a quote up.
Well, what happened was that I ascribed events that were supposed to have taken place before the death of Piers Gaveston to events that actually took place after the death.
You made something up. Let me ask you about another little...
I mildly sandpapered something somebody
Let me ask
said.
you about a barefaced lie.
It's very embarrassing. I'm very sorry about it.
Let me ask you about a barefaced lie. When you were in Michael Howard's team, you denied to him you were having an affair. It turned out you were. And he sacked you for that. Why did you lie to your party?
Well, with great respect. On that, I never had any conversation with Michael Howard about that matter. And, I don't...
You did lie to him.
Well, I don't propose to go into all that again.
I don't blame you.
No, well, why should I? I've been through, that question a lot with the. Watch the documentary.
Okay.
Why don't we talk about something else?
The programme also includes. Well, this is about your integrity.
Okay.
The programme includes your reaction as you listen to a phone call, in which your friend Darius Guppy asks you to supply the address of a journalist, so that he can have him physically assaulted. The words beaten up and broken ribs are said to you. And you, having heard that, you tell your friend, Darius Guppy, you will supply the address. What does that say about you, Boris Johnson?
Well,
aren't you, in fact, making up quotes, lying to your party leader, wanting to be part of someone being physically assaulted? You're a nasty piece of work, aren't you?
Well, Eddie, I think all three things I would dispute.
Well, you don't factually dispute.
And I was saying, if we had a media that routinely took lines like that, we'd have a very different politics. As far as I'm concerned, in terms of the levels of blame, at the very top is our media. I blame them above everyone else, because the sort of politicians who behave as they are could never get into those senior positions if we had a media that did its job properly.
Can I just interrupt for a second? I think, Phil, you talked about it on your channel some time ago, where there was a Tory MP, I don't know if it was a minister or an MP, who was interviewed by local radio, and they were torn to pieces. And I think you mentioned how this wouldn't happen
Liz Truss, wasn't it?
Was it Liz Truss?
Liz Truss, yeah.
Yeah, it was Liz Truss. So she was torn to pieces because she got interviewed. I don't remember what they were talking about, but she got torn to pieces because this local interviewer says, "Well, I don't have to build a career on this. I don't have to suck up to the Prime Minister or who I think she was Prime Minister at the time.
She was, yeah.
And it just you would never see something like that at the national level. And this
We
trust
rarely
really
do.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes you get the odd one who goes, "Right, I'm going to go for it now."
But you need more like that. That's the thing.
Yes. Yeah, and it's because on the local level, they know this is their one chance in their entire career to interview a prime minister. It's never going to happen again. Whereas someone on the BBC wants to interview them regularly. And the problem is, from the point of view of the editors, or maybe the people behind the editors, is they think to themselves, if we piss these ministers off, they won't come on our show, and then we don't have a show. That's the wrong way of thinking. I would say, no, you have your show, and you make clear that you're going to discuss things with their political opponents, and that you invited them on and they refused to come on. So we will just discuss what you are doing without your presence, but there's a chair for you. You are welcome to come along. And that's what they should do.
That's what Piers Morgan did over COVID. And it was Theresa Coffey that had the meltdown. And by the way, that was interesting. You brought up Eddie Marr there, who was the replacement for Andrew Marr. Because one of the things I'm looking at it recently. When Boris is being addressed about the Michael Howard stuff, he says pretty much when he's giving a response to Eddie Marr's question about him lying to Michael Howard, is that he never had that conversation with Michael Howard. Therefore, he's suggesting that Michael Howard was the liar, which is one hell of a fucking thing to come out and say. Rob, what are your thoughts on this? Considering we're all YouTubers, we get more views together than GB News ever does, and we're all trying to actually counter them. And it appears the youth are changing. They're not being so sort of manipulated by the right-wing British media. What are your thoughts on this, Rob?
Well, first of all, I think all four of us probably, Alex, get more views than a single programme on GB News. I mean, they're failing badly. But yeah, I think, the demographics are, that if you look at the demographics that are still reading the right-wing oligarch-owned press, because that's what they are, it's the elderly. They're dying off, and the circulations of all the major papers are actually going down. So I think that's a great process that's happening now, a great trend. I agree with Phil. I think a lot of the problems in this country are politics, are just the press that's so dominated by the voices of the oligarchs. And I put it even above sort of party politics, really. If you look at where the ownership of our press is, they're almost exclusively oligarchs living abroad whose own interests don't coincide with the interests of the United Kingdom. And how that can be allowed. I find it very frustrating. I think there should be some rules about press ownership. As I say, with the process that's happening at the moment, it will become less and less important as time goes on. But it's, the Americans have far stricter rules on who owns the press than we do.
It's interesting as well with GB News, because we were talking about that in last week's show with that we were talking about GB News and Legaton, who are the owners. And I think that the two major shareholders aren't based in the UK. One's in Saudi Arabia, and unfortunately, I forget where the other is based. It's not the UK. And then I think there are two Tory MPs on the board, which will also explain why they've managed to suck in so many dullards from the Conservative Party to do their shows. I mean, could you imagine how good their programming would be if they had one of us four on there? But would any of you actually do a deal with the devil to be on GB News? We were talking about this last week. Go on, Rob. I've
got one of the GB News presenters was on my show with me a couple of months ago, and he's coming back on in April. But he's a lovely guy, actually. And I asked him why he goes on GB News, but he reckons that that things may change there, that they're not necessarily destined to remain a sort of fringe, weirdo right-wing news channel. That actually they've got plans to just be an alternative voice. I mean, time will tell, but. I won't mention my contact there, but he's fairly left-leaning, and he seems to think it's he's doing a good job on GB News to try and broaden their their focus on more than just sort of right-wing talking points. So.
There is an ex-Labour MP on GB News, no? I forget what her name is, but
he's not the one that took the knee and got unceremoniously dumped, was he? Somebody took the knee.
That was no, I don't know if he was an MP, but there is a lady.
Wasn't that Harris or something? That was like Boris Johnson. I could be wrong, but it wasn't, because I don't watch it.
But
we'll
believe you.
That was someone who used to work for Boris Johnson, But I may be wrong. I may be
But
mixing.
no, but there is an ex-Labour MP. She lost her seat in 2019, and then she was hired, and she gives a sort of left
was
wing.
she trying to be one of the Lexiteers?
She might have
Maybe
been.
that's what. Maybe that's what they're more interested in,
Yes.
rather than left and right politics. Maybe they're more interested in that.
I've got to give them some credit because they've had Richard Hewison from the Rejoin EU party on several times. Although apparently they've gone quite quiet because he tore John Redwood apart.
Oh, poor John. I like John. He doesn't block you.
He runs away from Steve Bray, though. That is
He
hilarious.
He doesn't answer me. He never gets back to me, but he doesn't block me at least.
I've never seen John Redwood lose it with someone, but he literally mumbled under his breath, "You stupid man." And I was like, wow. Max, what are your thoughts? Would you go on GB News if you had the opportunity?
If I did, I wouldn't have a channel after that. No, I don't think I would, because I think because of so many times I've been criticizing them, I don't think they'd like to see me anywhere near their studio. But it would be good to get somebody from GB News on here, I think, so we could have a chat with them.
I think that's possible. I think we've actually had someone who's been on GB News a few times, none of the presenters or anything, but we actually have had a member of our I don't know what we call ourselves, our team, our family. There's always a dodgy cousin, isn't there?
I don't know. I don't necessarily mind any platform. Obviously, I would have to be able to tell the truth as I understood it. If they're cool with that, then I don't see. And as long as they pay me for my time, because I'd have to go to London, I presume. And I don't like going to London, so they'd have to pay me. But if they want to pay me $100,000 a year, like Lee Anderson, to do what? How many shows is he even doing for that?
No idea.
I don't even know how many shows he's doing. It better be more than one. Lee Anderson is the man who said as well, specifically of MPs, oh, if you need to do some side work for like $100,000 a year extra, whatever, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be an MP. Now, what's he doing? Granted, he needs some work, but
offer him enough money, he'll do anything, won't he?
Yeah, if they want to pay me that to come down,
maybe
once a
he's
week,
preparing the ground because he doesn't expect to be an MP.
I'm quite sure that is exactly the case. But if they want to pay me, and they're quite happy for me to give my views, which are completely counter to all their other shows' views, I don't have a problem with that.
Do you think it would affect your viewership at all going on there? And
I think it'd be hilarious. No, I don't think at all. At the end of the day, people presumably want to hear me saying what I would say wherever. So if GB News want to invite me on so that I can completely tear down the bollocks that the rest of their presenters talk, no problem. If they want me to front a show where I get people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorris on, yes, they'd have to pay me, but yes, absolutely.
They had Michael Walker from Novora TV on, and he went full Chomsky on them because I think it was Jacob Rees-Mogg, and there was some other person.
They were looking at people who are elected politicians, and they were letting real terrorists through the net.
I'll put that to one. I don't want to cast aspersions about how extreme your opinions are.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, I didn't hear the contributions of your previous contributor. But I do want to, I suppose, comment on the whole framing of this discussion, because we've had a report, which I think was quite a serious report, independent public inquiry. And what that has suggested is that there were serious failings from MI5. And yes, as you say, potentially this was one person's human error. But the big picture here, which we're not talking about, I think, is that this guy had come back 4 days earlier from Libya. Yeah. That wasn't an immigration issue. This was a British citizen. And he had gone to Libya to fight with jihadists, and that was part of British foreign policy. So for a long period, MI6 were quite keen on jihadists going because they thought they would fight Gaddafi and they would fight on the UK side. And so for us to be having a conversation about political correctness, cancel culture, or immigration, when there is a serious government failure.
So you're saying there was a simple foreign policy failure. They were worried about Syria, but not about Libya.
No. So that's not the failure. That's not the failure I'm talking about. The failure I'm talking about is thinking that it's a sensible foreign policy to take out foreign leaders, as we did in Libya in 2011. We said we were just going to be doing a no-fly zone, but we went for regime change. At the same time...
Do you think regime change is a sensible foreign policy?
No, you're misunderstanding.
No, sorry, I thought you said that.
The foreign policy, which I am saying is a mistake,
yes, I agree
was
with that.
to
Yes.
bring about regime change in Libya. And at the same time, because MI6 thought it was useful to overthrow Gaddafi, to allow jihadists to go and fight in that civil war. Now, Salman Abedi, he learnt how to make a bomb in Libya, fighting in a civil war which started because of British foreign policy. And this to me seems much more important than political correctness. In this very sensible report, political correctness wasn't mentioned at all.
And Michael Walker tore him apart because they pointed out that the person they were accusing of being a migration issue was actually British.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, you know what he said about Grenfell? I don't think we need to take his word about any national disaster seriously.
Common sense. Yeah, common sense not to listen to you, Jacob. But I was going to bring up the monarchy and the press and their relationship, because that's an interesting one that's obviously come out due to Harry.
I don't really have any. I mean, I'm sort of pro-monarchy myself, but I don't really care about it from a celebrity point of view. And that's all that's in the news. I just view any sort of royal news as celebrity news, and I'm not interested. I'm only interested in the constitutional side of it, which gets not a single column inch in the Daily Mail.
No,
Rob? No, I'm similar. You know, I'm not a monarchist, but I just take zero interest in the celebrity gossip surrounding them. The constitutional side is far more interesting. I agree with Phil, but it's not something you see covered. But,
Max?
All I hear about is about Harry and Meghan, and for me, like, if they want to live their lives a particular way, that's their decision, and I really don't understand the obsession that the right-wing media have with them. They just really hate them, but they don't.
Harry and Meghan.
Yeah, and I think it's because it drives traffic to the likes of GB News, or it sells newspapers, and that's all it's about. Like, you know, I've seen pictures of what's her name, Kate, carrying her child in a particular way, and Meghan doing exactly the same thing, and one was was honored for the way she was doing it, and the other was vilified. They're a cash cow for the right wing media, and it's horrible to watch, because this is very dangerous, I think, and I understand why Harry. I don't want to go into this too much, but I understand why Harry wants to separate himself from the royal family and just put as much distance between himself and Britain at the moment, because he feels safe in the US probably, and he cares about his wife, and he understands what they're capable of. The media are capable of. They did it to his mother. So, So I think in his opinion is, you can try and use them, but they'll abuse you. So it's best to try and create as much, put as much distance between yourself and them as possible.
I wonder if the Harry and Meghan thing is not so much an aspect of the royal family and the monarchy. It's just that they've fallen victim to the Conservatives' culture war, because they seem to be just an embodiment of what these culture warriors are fighting against. This wokeness or whatever. They seem to be the token for it. I don't know.
It is interesting in the fact that the media seems to be propping it up as a system, and again, the youth seem to be pulling away from that. At least statistically, there's a suggestion that they've got less interest in it. I think it's again the power of the press that seems to be pushing this idea. The BBC are meant to be impartial, but when it came to all of this stuff, and I'm sure we'll see it with the coronation coming up around the corner, it'll be one side of the view, and you will not hear. I didn't hear a counter argument to it anywhere, or a point of questioning of it, a point of criticizing it. I mean, we're talking about cost of living crisis, which I'm sure we can go into in a minute, in regards to how Brexit's going at the moment. And yet the taxpayer is expected to put up 100 million towards it. But it's also been pointed out repeatedly by people from GB News, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, this is a religious ceremony. So it's a bit like, well, one, he didn't pay any tax for inheritance because they've got a special agreement. And then second of all, it's a religious ceremony. So why aren't the church, who's got plenty of money from what they tell, and monarchs, why aren't they stumping it up in a cost of living crisis? Especially as he's 73. I mean, it's definitely happened before where you've had three monarchs in 1 year, which could mean there's 100 million to go again. Go on, Phil, I can see you want to say.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I am religious and I am a monarchist to all intents and purposes, and I do not agree with having this coronation, especially if you're going to bill it as a religious affair, because I want separation of state and all religion. But also, he's already the king. Someone's already put the hat on his head. He doesn't need a special ceremony, you know. And if he did, it doesn't have to cost £100 million. I will do it. You know,
for 100,000.
He's already got the chair and the hat. If he just needs someone to lift it up and be filmed having it put on his head and say an oath, that does not cost £100 million.
You could do it for the same price as Lee Anderson is getting from GB News.
This is the thing. Like, I hate the mystique and all that of it. Like, I am a monarchist for the point of view of I see a constitutional benefit in a constitutional monarch as opposed to an elected president. That's really all there is to it. I'm not interested in the fannying about, particularly when it's going to look this bad. We have got a cost of living crisis. Yes, £100 million divided by everyone doesn't amount to very much, but it's the point of the matter. It's not necessary. It's expenditure that doesn't achieve anything.
Do you think it would have been better if he footed the bill himself? He said, "Look, I'm going to pay for it. I'm not actually going to get the."
I think it would have been better if he'd have just said to the press, "I can put my own hat on my own fucking head."
Well, allegedly he doesn't have somebody.
Allegedly
he doesn't brush his own teeth. He has somebody who puts the toothpaste.
Oh,
I'm
not sure I believe that.
No, I think it's.
No, I mean, having someone to put your trousers on is one thing. Even that, I bet, doesn't happen these days. But I'm not anyway.
I do. I mean, there's two. One, Napoleon put the crown on his own head. There's a precedent. And then on top of that, you could also. It was interesting. You just said about the toothpaste going on the toothbrush. I'm slightly thinking. I wonder if Rishi Sunak, when he was asked about the light bulb, was just.
It's not that difficult.
Perfect example. Thank you for that demonstration. It did occur to me a little bit when Rishi Sunak was pulled up on the light bulb. Was it just a case that he was like, why did she get her servant to do it for her? Okay. I mean, she's got so much money. He's literally, it came up recently in the news about him having a pool put in and having to get special electrical cabling put in. And I think he also had special dispensation towards getting the internet cable, fiber broadband put in as well. To his credit, though, from what I understood and read, he paid for it himself. It didn't come out of the tax bill. Yeah. So you got to give him a bit of due on that. But then he's made so much money and savings from not paying his full amount of tax. It's a bit of a joke, really, isn't it? Well, we'll have to promote that, Phil, and say that you'll do it. Say you'll save 100 million for the country.
Yeah, I won't charge anything. I'll just go down. I'll even pay for my own train ticket just to get it done.
What's everyone's thoughts on Boris and his little meetup? Max, your turn. What are your initial thoughts on this?
I haven't been watching it because I couldn't really be bothered. It's just really no. We know he's a liar. We know he's a charlatan, and that's all he's going to do. He's just going to regurgitate things that he said before. I don't know about you other guys if you've been watching it, but how long is it going to go on for? Is it like a funeral or something? It's going to go on for a week.
No, it's going to go for a lot longer than that.
Oh, yeah. God. And the problem with this is just one thing. It sucks the oxygen out of the room. It's like we're not going to really be talking about anything else apart from that. And there are more important things, I think. I'm not saying that what he did is not important, but it's becoming it will become a bit of a spectacle, I think.
I've got something to argue against that, but I want to let's take this over to Phil and then Rob. Phil, what are your thoughts on Partygate and Johnson's grilling?
I mean, you can see from polling, the actual hearing made zero difference to public opinion. I can't imagine it made any difference to the committee's opinion. The only thing that could have really happened as a result of that hearing was Boris Johnson having a Richard Nixon moment and saying, well, when it's the Prime Minister, it's not illegal. He didn't do that, which is why he didn't really need to get mad at all at the committee, because it went as well as can be expected. As far as I've not seen barristers going, oh, we reckon he committed perjury there. That's all he had to do, avoid a perjury charge, because everyone's views are already formed. There's already lots of document. Anyone who wants to be critical and actually think, oh, I want to be neutral until I've seen all the evidence. There's loads of evidence out there. People can read it themselves. It's been going on for best part of a year. It's like 1 month shy of a year since the inquiry was ordered. And everyone's views are just what they are, and they've not changed as a result of this hearing, and they'll still not change. But what's interesting in terms of the breakdown on the polling, in terms of people who think he misled Parliament or not, if you look at the party breakdown, okay, there's differences, but in every single case, way more people think he misled Parliament than didn't, even amongst Conservative voters. But you split it into Remain and Leave, and way more Leavers think he didn't mislead Parliament than did. And that is why, and I'm going to do a video on this, that is why all the Brexiteers, all the different types of Brexiteers, they can disagree with each other on all sorts of things. They all are backing Boris Johnson here because he's their talisman. He is their... They think that with him out of the way, that Brexit will be reversed, which it will. They think that he is the only way to guard Brexit until it's properly bedded in, and that is why all of them, because it's the only group, the only demographic. You split it by age, you split it by political party. The only demographic where you've got more people thinking he didn't mislead the House than did is Leave voters.
Isn't that interesting? It makes you wonder what they're reading or viewing to come to that conclusion. Goes back to the press again. Rob, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just absolutely what Phil said. You think about it in terms of a Venn diagram, Phil, the intersection between the Brexit cult and the Johnson cult. And I use the word cult advisedly because it's become a cult. In terms of Johnson, again, I've got to agree with Phil. Nobody's changed their mind like the lava lamp cult again, the three cults going on. What was it? Nobody is going to change their mind from that hearing with Johnson there, those 5 hours or whatever it was that he sat through it. I sat through it. I don't think anybody would have changed their mind. They've already changed it. Because basically, whether he's guilty or not guilty, we've all seen the fucking photos. We know he was having a piss up. We know he was having parties. There are people out there that are not persuaded. They've actually seen those photos, and those photos represent what they obviously do represent to normal people, If you can see those photos and still think that he hasn't misled Parliament on what he said, then you're deluded. Nothing's going to change your mind. And those people that nothing's going to change their mind, they are the same Brexit cult. They're the same people as Phil says. It's a Venn diagram that overlap. Brexit cult, Johnson cult, same people now. And it's good.
I have to make a point of correction there, like they do in Parliament. This is a religion, not a cult.
The difference between a religion and a cult is just the size.
Alex, just on the hearing, the only thing that I thought was reasonably interesting was that I thought the most effective... I thought Harriet Harman was fantastic in the chair, but I was very surprised that Bernard Jenkin, the Tory MP, that was really putting Boris Johnson on the spot, because Bernard Jenkin is always and still is a Brexitist. He still believes in Brexit.
No, he came out on Newsnight about...
Did he? Oh.
Yeah, it was like 11 or 12 months ago. So on Newsnight, it was, and he was interviewed. Can't remember by who. But he was on Newsnight, and they said, "Is Brexit working?" He said, "It doesn't work."
Right.
It doesn't work. Yeah. I don't think he. I mean, he's quite clear now, but I never felt that he liked Boris. He came out and criticised Brexit, which was quite shocking, almost like a regret. And on top of that, I mean, there were points where he was smiling because he's dealt with Boris before in committee, and he does ride him hard.
He was the chair of the liaison committee, wasn't he, while Boris Johnson was Prime Minister?
And he grilled him. He didn't hold back. Then I assume he takes the committee process very seriously. It's there. There's a check on power to go, just because you're Prime Minister doesn't mean you shouldn't be questioned correctly. And you can fob it off within Parliament, but you will not fob it off in the committee. And there's always been a bit of an argument of where power really lies. Does it lie in the committee? We go off and do the research and make the suggestions as to what happens with certain bills, or is it within Parliament that has the vote? So it's quite an interesting thing, and I get the impression he just doesn't like Boris. I'm sure there are.
It's interesting if he has flipped then, Alex, that it's sort of it proves the rule really, because he's flipped from he's now anti-Boris, or if he's always been anti-Boris, then he's flipped to the Remain side perhaps. So that keeps our Venn diagram in check, because he's changed on both. He's anti-Boris and now he's anti-Brexit from what you said. So,
but I think it's interesting what you said about the select committees and the committees in general. They're I find them much more interesting to watch than Parliament, because Parliament is more theatrical, but the select committees, you really see, you get into the nitty gritty about what's really happening, but also the politicians are much more serious and they're not playing some sort of game, which is interesting to see.
Well, you get cross party support. They actually work together.
Yeah, it's one of the few times, isn't it? And you don't get that impression in any.
It's because the media aren't shining a spotlight on them, so their party political games, they're self-defeating because they won't get the work done, and ultimately they know they need to work with each other. And outside of that, because most people are not going to watch select committee hearings.
No, I was slightly disappointed with the SNP. I believe it was the SNP.
It was, yeah. He was a bit rubbish, wasn't he?
I was hoping for a fiery Scot.
we got one. It was just that was the Tory MP, Alberta Costa.
Yeah.
He knew how to handle Johnson. He treated him like a naughty 7-year-old who thought he was cleverer than the teacher, I think is the way I described it. He knew exactly what to say to him. The problem with Bernard Jenkins' questions were better, but he didn't know how to handle Johnson, and he didn't pick him up. I don't think he picked him up on a couple of things.
I would also say, isn't it interesting that no one brought up the fact that in a funeral you could only have 6, but in a work party, which was for morale, I mean, that was his defence.
I wouldn't have brought that up, because in all honesty, and a lot of lawyers have said this, the guidance actually a lot of the time didn't make sense. That would be then picking fault with the guidance. What they were trying to get at and what they had to focus on is, what did Boris Johnson understand the guidance and the rules to be compared with what he told Parliament? So things like that would have gotten into an argument about what the guidance should have been rather than what Boris's understanding of it was.
And I guess that wouldn't bring up the failing within that committee sort of respect, but actually that is a failing in itself. And part of this is down to the fact they had no plan. Or at least according to Cummings, when he requested the plan, he said it was about that thick.
He said, quote, "I've been told for years that there is a whole plan for this. There is no plan. We're in huge trouble. I've come through here to the, Helen McNamara said, I've come through here to the Prime Minister's office to tell you all, quote, I think we are absolutely I think this country's heading for a disaster. I think we're going to kill thousands of people. As soon as I've been told this, I've come through to see you. It seems from the conversation that you're having that that's correct."
He literally had to go off and build a plan from scratch with no time to prep, because Boris had delayed everything, being like, oh, it's swine flu, it'll pass, it won't get here, it's not a problem. And literally, I was ahead of the curve, because I'd heard about this and called up some schools in Hong Kong offering online support, because I knew they'd shut down. And I got through to a couple of the British schools that are based in Hong Kong, and they turned around and said, yeah, they've shut everything down. It's totally closed up. You can't go out. I was like, that's crazy. I was doing that, I think, in February. So I recognised that it was a bigger problem and issue than the government in February. And in part because of Boris telling everyone it wasn't an issue. And you go, all it would have taken is a couple of phone calls to assess how severe the situation is. And if you've got British citizens over there, you can figure it out relatively quickly. It shows this. There was even the bit that always shocks me was when he was having to explain.
When I was having PPE meetings around the cabinet room table, we were told, oh, well, the PPE won't arrive. This obviously is not going to arrive for months. Well, why is it not going to arrive for months? Well, because it takes that long to ship. Why are you shipping it? Well, we ship it because that's what we always do. But hang on, we're going to have a peak in the NHS around about mid-April, and you're shipping things from China that are going to arrive in months' time, and all the airplanes are not flying. Leave this meeting, commandeer the planes, fly them to China, drop them at the nearest airfield, pick up our stuff, fly it back. At this point, we had Trump sending the CIA around trying to gazump everybody on PPE.
And none of the civil servants had thought about this. And in part, it's because there was no plan. We now have a plan, but only because of the circumstances that took place here. But it shows the complete and utter ineptitude. So it's interesting that you bring that up, Phil, because I hadn't taken that into account. But it then goes back to the original, the real crux of the issue, which is they never made a plan for an emergency situation.
They actually did have a plan. They had exercise sickness, which actually advised the government what you had to do. I think Jeremy Hunt was Minister of Health at the time. Is that correct?
I think it was. I think it was when it was conducted, but I think Matt Hancock when the recommendation should have been applied.
But in that report, they said you have to change all this PPE. It's not fit for purpose. A lot of it is out of date. Yeah. You need all this. You need to invest in these resources. You need to invest resources in things. Check warehousing, stuff like that. And it was like the report was quite comprehensive, but it was pretty much ignored by Matt Hancock.
That comes back to the plan. There were recommendations, but nothing was compiled together to produce an actual coherent plan as to what to do in different stages.
That is
so all they had recommendations and experts that should have some idea of what to do, but there wasn't anything concise. At least that's according to Cummings. You could be completely correct, and actually sickness was the actual plan. But the impression that Cummings gave, and you can always take a pinch of salt with that lying little scumbag, as to whether or not he was telling the truth. But that was his claim. Sorry, Max.
No. If Phil wanted to comment something.
I was just going to say, this just comes back to the fact that what so many people have said it. Harold Wilson said it. Neil Kinnock said it. I've seen it in my life. Tories are seat fillers. They don't want to govern. They want to reduce government. So they did have a plan. It's just that their plan is keeping the public on side. And because the public are fickle, their plan only needs to last for a few days. That's what they hope. So they try and manage the situation. I mean, you look at the lockdown. Boris Johnson 1 week says, don't go to the pub this weekend. And then everyone goes to the pub and says, oh, you bastards. Right, I'm going to have to lock you down now. I mean, so of course there's no long-term plan for the pandemic, even though the government for the previous decade had said it's the number one threat to the nation, a global pandemic, albeit they were expecting a flu-based one, not a SARS-based one. But they don't plan to govern. They plan to just stop other people governing. So their plan, what they consider an emergency, is the public turning on them. And all they want to do is do just enough to stop the public turning on them at all times.
They're like the DUP. Maybe, I don't know if they're worse than the DUP.
Crazier. No, I think the DUP are a little bit crazier.
But the idea of stopping others from actually doing work.
Well, yeah.
Well, they did believe Boris about the barrier down the Irish Sea, didn't they?
Wow.
It won't be a border. It's interesting that we brought this up because I didn't think we'd be bringing this other point up in conversation, which is so David King came out today saying we need to put a plan together for a mega tsunami. Now, it sounds a bit far-fetched, but the Canary Islands are a set of volcanic islands, and it looks like a chunk of it is slowly splitting off.
There's one, I can't remember which one it is, but it's one island. There's one island, and I can't remember which one it is, and it's basically two rocks, one on top of the other. And at some point, the top rock's going to slide into the sea, and 4 hours later, the east coast of America is going to be very wet. I don't know particularly what danger we're in, but the east coast of America, which is where a lot of people live, are...
There's evidence to show stuff like that's happened before, but not in recorded modern last 10,000 year history. We're meant to have it hit. Either it'll hit the East Coast and then come back at us, or some of the ripple effects will go north. And they reckon it'll hit Cornwall massively, and it would smash into Bournemouth, Brighton, I think Brighton and Southampton and Portsmouth.
Brighton, that's the only Green MP.
Caroline, no.
That's not very fair.
I was warning you.
A pissing environmentalist is going to get swept away. Although, to be fair, this isn't climate change. This is just a big rock that's going to fall into the sea.
Yeah, at some point. I mean, well, I guess it depends, doesn't it? Because if it falls off in bits and pieces, that's the thing you can hope for. But there's no way of knowing that's ever going to happen. No. I mean, there's all sorts of issues with volcanic activity. Although we've completely digressed from politics. But the point is, so David King is saying there's no plan. And Dominic Cummings also said there's no plan for a solar flare, and that also happened recently.
Yeah.
Although it's on the opposite side of the sun. And I reckon if it had been on our side, we would have had significant disruption to both phone signal, satellites, and internet connection for at least a 3-day period, to the point where they were predicting what took place in, I think it was 1898, where there was signal disruptions with Telegram, which they believe was down to a solar flare. But apparently Cummings had come out and said, we've got no plan for that either. What do we do?
But the response, but it's always a response to the action, response to the activity after. It's never planning, because planning costs money. Planning is seen as a waste in many cases, and that's what.
Apart from
I
the
think.
Queen. Sorry,
Yes.
Max.
No. That's an interesting point. But it's the same with climate change. We know what's going to happen, but people are like, oh, let's not do anything because we're not seeing the results of it now. We are actually seeing the results of it now, but it's something slow. It's a slow-moving giant, but
until it's not.
But it's this case of, we'll deal with it when it happens, not we'll put in measures beforehand. And I think this is also a problem with our governments, is that the governments are short-lived, 5 years maximum. If we look at what's happening in China, for example, they say, okay, let's view things on a 25-year viewpoint, so that we can put in measures to deal with it in the long term, not just in the short term.
Even if they'd had a committee meeting once a year on each of these topics, which is more than doable, one day a year, just go, what is it? We would have a better plan for all of these things than no days at all ever.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, as I was about to say, the Queen has had 3 meetings a year to plan for the funeral. And I always then go back to this thing of, if the Queen's having that 3 days a year, 3 days a year are set aside to plan for the Queen's funeral and update it and make changes. And why is that not being done for the public?
Because...
But I promise I'll be quiet in a second, Phil. The other thing would be, we've had 10 days of mourning for the Queen, and we have had 0 mourning for the 200,000 dead of COVID. And you're going, what the fuck? How can you treat the average Joe like that? And then one person gets all this special treatment because their great to the power of 10, power of 20 grandfather cousin was really good at killing people. I mean, and I appreciate, Phil, your view on this. I can see it. You can argue there's a level of stability that's there. And as I've said in the past, I'd rather have had one vote, for a lifetime or up to a retirement age of 70 for someone. And I'd rather have had Barbara Windsor in charge. Like, she would have been a great queen. Or David Attenborough as king. He would have been a great king. And you go, yeah, there you go. You get to be king up until the age of 70 and have all the pomp and rigor with your kids. They can be princes until you pass it. And then we have another vote. And then you've got that long-term viewpoint. I'd prefer that.
Because we've got a great track record of voting for people, haven't we?
Prince Andrew, come on.
All this talk, Alex, you're saying basically, the lack of planning for COVID and how we didn't act on all the advice, the warnings and things, and the small government. But let's not also forget, Boris Johnson, even after COVID happened, he missed the first 5 Cobra meetings that were held to deal with the onset of the pandemic. He missed all 5, even when we knew it was upon us. That's how much he cared,
But the thing is, what the Conservatives... I mean, Boris Johnson is an extreme version of it, but the reason why they'll have 3 meetings a year about the Queen dying and not about other much more serious things is because, from a Conservatives' point of view, they know the Queen's going to die. They sort of understand immortality is not a thing. But something like a solar flare might never happen. What if it happens while Labour in power? We spent the money on it. That's how they think. Spending the money means taxes. We don't want to spend the money. If we spend money on dealing with a natural disaster, then it might be pissing Labour who get the credit for it. So they think we'll worry about it when it happens, because they don't like spending on things we need now, like healthcare. They're certainly not. That's why we didn't have the stockpiles of PPE, because someone's looked at it. How much is this? It's going to cost money for this stuff which we might not need. Like, we hadn't had a pandemic for ages. We might have remembered when we had SARS in the early noughties, and a few people had a thermometer stuck in the forehead at the airports. But and there was a big panic about it, but nothing ultimately happened. They think, well, we can deal with that. We don't need warehouses full of PPE for that. That's what they think. They think we'll worry about it when it happens.
And the other way that they like to save money is, I don't know if anybody saw the story of Angela Kilmartin, the Conservative councillor down in Braintree, who objected to money being spent on sex flags. Did you see that story? Apparently the businesses in Braintree are paying out for these Pride March flags, and she called them sex flags. They should be kept to the bedroom, she said.
Yeah, she obviously skipped the 60s, didn't she?
Well, it sort of makes a certain amount of sense. Braintree is James Cleverly's constituency, and you sort of think to yourself, was he really the best candidate they can come up with? And if this is the quality of councillor there, possibly yes.
Yeah.
I always say that it only costs about £44 to change your surname. So I've mentioned that to James Cleverly on a number of occasions.
Unfortunately, he can't change the name of his constituency unless he moves.
I also realised that interesting you bring up changing your names, because it's Barbara Windsor, isn't it? And she's a real Windsor. She's more of a Windsor.
Right.
It's like leisure-wise, so I get to troll people.
They're quite a powerhouse group, pun intended. Truth to power. A different powerhouse. There you go. I brought in Phil's.
Oh, I now see what you did there. A power Phil Morehouse. Right. Okay. Yeah.
No, it took me a moment to get it as well. So.
Yeah. I got it. I get it. Yeah. How long did that take you, Alex? That one?
2 seconds. I just saw it. I don't know.
He's quite quick.
I genuinely don't know how I do it sometimes. It's luck. It's not deliberate. I'm not thinking. Reporter that turned up at the gas stations to report on the fuel shortages, which I'm sure all of us remember fondly. But he was called Phil McCann.
Yes, I remember.
Like, that is no, I do not believe for a second anyone did that on purpose. How's everyone?
Can I just tell you a quick story about the power of Twitter and the strength of my following on Twitter? I put on a tweet earlier and I took a screenshot. My subscribers, I think, are 26,999, and I put on Twitter, who wants to be the 27,000th subscriber? So I checked in an hour later, and it's gone down to 26,995. So, woohoo!
Anyway, on that note, we're out. I'm sorry. I know. That was a good laugh. But thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Cheers, Alex. Bye-bye. Bye all.